Welcome to Rising Woman Leaders. I'm your host, Meredith Ram, and I believe the time has come for women to share their gifts, their voice, and their stories. I love seeing women spiritually and financially empowered, thriving in their life's work, and doing what they love every day. I've gathered a community of women living their dreams to tell us their stories and inspire us to step into more courage, self-love, and feminine leadership. If you like this podcast, follow me on Instagram at Rising Woman Leaders and sign up for email updates at risingwomanleaders.com. Now get cozy with a journal and a cup of tea. I hope you enjoy today's show. I'm here today with Nikki Silvestri, who is the founder and CEO of Soil and Shadow, a project development firm designing economic and environmental strategies with human left in. As the co-founder of Live Real and former executive director of People's Grocery and Green for All, Nikki has built and strengthened social equity for underrepresented populations in food systems, social services, public health, climate solutions, and economic development. A nationally recognized thought leader, her many honors include being named one of the Roots 100 most influential African Americans. Thanks for being here, Nikki.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
So I first would love to just hear your journey of entrepreneurship and becoming your own business, starting your own business, and also just the work that you do and how you came to find it and begin to serve others.
My journey of entrepreneurship. It never occurred to me that I could be an entrepreneur that wasn't a social entrepreneur. I think that's probably the place to start. My parents run a foster family agency, and they have since I was a child. And so working for the betterment of young Black and brown boys was kind of the beginning of my, this is what you can do for a job. This is what you can do to better the community. That's where it all started for me. And when I was evangelized by An Inconvenient Truth, it came out when I was in college. And so it hit the perfect sweet spot for me in terms of time for something that felt like the most important issue that we were dealing with as a species at that point. Being a nonprofit leader just felt like the way to serve in the best way. And something that's been really up for me lately is how the core of my service didn't include serving me as well. It was serve the community instead of serving me. And it led to a pretty profound breakdown in 2014, where that was when I left my nonprofit CEO jobs and found out I was going to have fertility struggles having my child, and my body was falling apart. It was a really hard time. And so it was then that I really started to consider how service was going to work holistically and not just one directionally. And so that was actually the beginning of my social entrepreneurship journey, was realizing that I was going to need to make money in a different way. And so being a for-profit was the way to do that. And when it comes to the topics and the things that I do for my work, I feel like that's a whole other topic. So I'm just going to pause there because there may be threads that we want to go down when it comes to that before I start talking about soil, because you get me started on soil, it'll be a whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do have a question that came up just from what you've shared so far of, I think it is pretty common that people that feel called to give back and to serve, and especially on these bigger issues of the environment and social activism and things that we're facing in our world, that burnout can be really prevalent. And I wonder if you could share just a little more of like what that looked like in 2014 when you hit that bottom or knew something needed to shift, and how did you start to collect yourself again?
What did it look like? And how did I start to collect myself again? What it looked like is still painful for me to really think about because it was me at my ugliest in a way. I was burned out as a nonprofit executive director of a local organization. And then right when I decided it was time to leave that job, another opportunity came up that was one of those once in a lifetime, or so I felt at the time, and you can't say no. So I said yes to a national CEO position when I was already burned out from my previous position, which might not have been the best idea. But I was really convinced that, oh no, I'm only 29 years old and I can't possibly be as burned out as I really think I am. I don't actually need 6 months off. I probably need 6 weeks off. There's never going to be another time when I'm going to be able to work with a group of leaders like this who are people of color who have this much influence. There were all of these things, all of these linear things that were in my head that did not match with my own inner wisdom. And I didn't have the sovereignty at that point to listen to my inner wisdom over those other things. And so I took the job, and I think I did as well as I could, but I was combative. I wasn't being responsive to feedback. I wasn't taking the help of people that were really trying to help me. And I was mean, frankly. I wasn't the kind of leader that I really needed to be. I felt like I was so up against a wall that I needed to fight everyone and everything. But the way that I fought was pretty passive aggressive and immature. And so I left that job because I wasn't the type of leader that organization needed at the time. I had the skills, I think, in some ways, but I didn't have the timing. And so my skills were not able to really flourish because the timing was such that I needed some work on my emotional body and matching that to my mental body as a leader. Mm-hmm. So then what it looked like when I left was I was emotionally like on the floor, a puddle on the floor for months. And my nervous system was even pretty active so that it was hard for me. I live in the forest now and lived in the forest then. And it was really hard for me to even drive down into the city. My nervous system was just so shot. And I think in some ways my adrenals were just so shot. So I spent a lot of time inside, being quiet. I deepened my spiritual practice, my reflective practice. I stopped talking to a lot of people. I really scaled back on work and committed to not stepping forward in leadership until I did some work to see what shadows and edges had come up for me that year. So that was the road of putting myself back together.
Yeah. Yeah. And that sounds like that's how you were able to birth the business that you have today.
Yeah, it was.
And how does it feel different now? What is different? How is it sustainable for you? What do you notice about your work today?
What's different is that I really check myself when I'm setting aside things that I know to be true because some part of me thinks they quote unquote can't exist in the same space, right? Like it's not possible for me to make the kind of money that I want to make and steward the type of resources that I would like to steward because it in some way is quote unquote wrong in our current globalized, imperialist, colonialist society, right? There was a lot of that rhetoric. So then I was having these self-defeating stories about abundance and money. Or there's no way I can actually do what I really love because it's not quote unquote financially viable. So let me pick something that feels financially viable but isn't actually what I love. There were all those kinds of things that I was doing before.
Yeah.
And now I just call myself on the BS and know that if I'm not fully activated and aligned with what I'm called to do, then I'm not really going to be of service anyway. And the most important thing is that I'm serving the betterment of the whole. And the whole includes me, and the whole includes all my relations. So I feel like the drumbeat and the heartbeat underneath my business is completely different than the way that it was when I was leading before. because my alignment is just better.
Yeah.
And I also just feel really clear about the what and the how of what I'm doing. It feels like it's the right answer, and it isn't particularly mainstream, but it's me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I love that piece about just calling yourself out on the limiting beliefs that you are holding, or saying, there can be a new way. There can be something new that is created here.
Oh yeah. And the only other thing I'll say about that is it felt particularly important for me as an African American woman to be able to recognize that.
Mm.
And I was recently speaking at a Black Student Success Summit at a university in the North Bay. And the students wanted me to share my experience as a Black woman, considering the history of slavery and current microaggressions and oppression, and just how do I heal and be resilient in the world as an African American woman. And something that feels very important to me now is that human history is really long. And the parts of it that we remember is not the whole story. There have been civilizations for 10,000 years that have had stories of abundance, whose temples still exist, whose philosophies still exist. And there is a thread, any story that I tell myself that feels like the truth, that is a narrative that does not serve me as a sovereign, whole, infinite being, is not a narrative that's useful for me. And so just me being able to see that as an African American woman and to be able to walk forward in wholeness and health will allow me then to really interact with the very real day-to-day pain of my people. But the only way I can be with that pain and not tolerate it, not defend against it, not treat it not treat it with less than the respect and the awe and the vulnerability and the tenderness that it deserves. In order to do that, I need to be whole myself. And so that was where me prioritizing my wholeness actually allows me to be a better social justice warrior in some ways, while also being an economic force and a driver and stewarding an abundance of resources so that I can build what I want to build for my family and my extended family and my extended community.
Mm. I'm just imagining that whole room lighting up when you spoke to them, and just like that force, that inspiration, that you doing it. It's just like, wow, okay, that it could be possible.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about soil. Tell us about
about soil. I love soil so much. Soil is a love of my heart. I was really inspired by soil because when I left my national climate director job, being in DC and sitting with drunk climate scientists that are super doomsday about the state of the world and where it's going was terrifying. And I was invited to a workshop on soil carbon sequestration, which is something I knew about, but I just didn't know how much of an influence it could have on our ability to recapture carbon and pull it back into the ground. And so for anyone listening who just heard a whole lot of jargon, a lot of the climate stuff and the climate change stuff that's happening right now is that we have 300 parts per million is the amount of carbon that we can have in the atmosphere healthily. And I think we're about 400 right now. We've been over 350 for a while. And so stopping emissions of carbon is one way to reduce carbon emissions in the atmosphere. But then what are you going to do with the carbon that's still there? And by reducing carbon emissions, that's like car exhaust, coal-fired power plants, methane from confined animal feed operations, etc. So then recapturing carbon and drawing it out of the atmosphere, the best way to do that is agriculture. That there was a lot of carbon that was in the ground and in the soil before. And carbon in the soil is like the lifeblood of how the richness and the life in soil happens. So there's ways to do agriculture. There's ways to do animal husbandry and ranching that pulls the carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it back in the soil where it belongs. So soil for me, it was so much more than just agriculture. It's like, oh, that's a way to keep the planet from becoming Venus. And the carbon storage potential of soil is so high that we could recapture all of the carbon we've emitted since the Industrial Revolution if we just managed our grasslands better.
Wow.
And then there's microbes with soil, which is something I talk about. Like, so soil fertility is the fertility as a concept. The way that I describe it is increasing the complexity of relationships. So not healthy relationships, not good relationships, not strong relationships, but complexity of relationships. Soil is one of the most vital resources on the planet. There's more organisms in a teaspoon of soil than there are humans on the planet. And the way that soil is able to maintain that depth and that level of life is through destruction and creation and sustaining and fighting and loving and all the things. So then I talk about social fertility as increasing the complexity of relationships between people. And if you do that, then you have that fertile, really rich, life-giving environment from which anything can grow. So I like to focus with my clients on, if whatever you're trying to grow, if it's coaching, if it's a business, if it's things in your personal life, with organizations, if it's initiatives, if it's projects, make sure that the relationships on your team are complex and have the ability to cycle through phases of conflict, because then you'll be able to grow whatever you want. So that was a lot, but like, soil for me is just, it's a metaphor and it's a really concrete thing at the same time.
Yeah, that's amazing to think of how nature is mirroring our reality in relationships. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give a small explanation of how to get carbon from the air into the soil? I'm just kind of curious how that works.
Yeah, so really what you're trying to do is you're trying to increase the photosynthetic ability of plants to take in carbon dioxide in a way, right? And so part of the tenets of healthy soil is you want diverse crops, not monocultures. You want animals that have hooves to walk all over the ground in tight bunches and drop their poop and do all the things. That's how the plains were built. So there's a way of grazing hooved animals like cows and sheep and things like that, so that it is creating the ripe environment for photosynthetic processes to happen with the plants that are on that particular piece of land. And then being able to do cover cropping, making sure that there's no exposed soil, is one way. And then resting your soil, not just planting over and over again.
Yeah. So pretty different than what a lot of this country is living off of in terms of food, how we grow food.
Very different. Very.
Yeah. And so your work is spreading this message and working with agriculture and companies. How do you get the message out about this?
Well, what's funny is that so I try to practice what I preach. Because I've been in climate change and food systems for my entire career, I have pretty deep relationships in both of those sectors. And I just try to stay in deep relationship with those who are working at the edge of this. And my work specifically is on the triple bottom line and how to do the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit really well if you're going deep. And so a lot of my work has been with underrepresented populations in climate change and food systems. So I've existed at this nexus of planet and people for the majority of my career. So I don't really get the word out. I listen a lot and I engage in conversations and I try to connect people to one another. And then through that, there are opportunities to support these incredible innovators that I respect so much.
Beautiful. And I'd love to hear more about the woman behind the business. And I know that you're a mother now. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey with fertility and your journey of becoming a mother?
Mm-hmm. Whew. Yes. So I'm one of those people that knew I wanted to be a mom since I was a kid. And when my husband and I got married in 2012, we did a ceremony on the winter solstice that year to call in the spirit of our child. And it was this really beautiful ritual that we did in the backyard of his childhood home. And it took 5 years from that point to conceive and have our child. And the journey was that we tried for a while, didn't conceive, started doing some fertility tests, saw that it was going to be really difficult that year that I left my job. That was a big part of my breakdown. And then once we got some confirmation on what was actually going on and we figured out what interventions we were going to need in order to conceive, we tried through those medical interventions, didn't conceive, spent a bunch of money, and I went on a downward spiral. And my husband and I, we stopped our process for about a year in 2016 because I went into this dark space of, I'm not even sure I want to be married to you. Maybe we shouldn't be having a child if we can't. And we did some really deep marriage counseling to work on issues that surfaced as a result of our fertility process. And I ended that year really in love with myself, which was a very important process. It was my ability to care for me and to not give up my sovereignty to care for myself to anyone, especially my husband, which is so easy to do because he's here all the time and I can really externalize responsibility for my well-being. But I feel like that year for me was this really radical moment of the truth is that I am alone. I came into this world alone and I will leave this world alone. And there is a way that I can always meet whatever need that I have. Support is beautiful, but leaning on humans with expectation is a losing battle because that's not the path to generosity and true grace. And the infinite always has my back. And there's always a way that I can pull resourcing from the infinite. So I deepened my practice like, whoa, in 2016. And then the first time we tried to get pregnant in February of 2017 was when we conceived. So I felt like it was the culmination of so much of that work. And then being a mother has been, I have a blog on my website that maybe you can link to in the show notes that kind of explains my pregnancy and birth story, if anyone's interested in hearing more about that part. But then motherhood has been this, it made me so grateful that there's a couple of different lineages of yoga that I work with. The Himalayan sage lineage is one. And it made me really grateful that I have experience in communities that have gurus and ashrams and rituals that are fasting rituals and things like that, because that level of discipline really supported me during my postpartum time and during this first year. It's 24/7 practicing grace and all these things that I always talk about, that I coach my clients on. It was now, okay, are you about to do this at 3:00 in the morning? For a year at 3:00 in the morning? Like, what does cumulative sleep deprivation look like? And there's no space anymore for me to BS about anything. You know, I wake up, I co-slept until about 2 weeks ago when he's 16 months old. because I really wanted to be able to nurse in the middle of the night easily. And nursing helps prevent him from getting sick.
Yeah.
So sleeping with an infant all night, night parenting, being kind at all of the wake ups and all of the slapping me in the faces and sitting on my face and all the things. And then wake up, be with my baby, have some care with my husband and a nanny during, 5-6 hour period most days so that I can work. Got to be very productive with work. I spend the afternoon with my child, then do some cooking. My husband puts the baby to bed, clean up the kitchen. And by that point, I'm exhausted. So I go to sleep and I try to fit in some meditation and some yoga in there somewhere. But it's 24/7 now. And it's given me access to my own leadership capacity in a way that I didn't even think was possible.
Yeah. Calling you into your greatness or your highest self to be there, to be on all the time. That's a lot. How do you make it sustainable? Or like for all the moms listening out there that are like, yeah, it's hard. What helps you through those hard moments?
What I said before about how it's up to me to care for myself and to not externalize that to anyone else. Mm-hmm. Part of that is that I feel like I started noticing all around me, there were these places where I had these hours that I was not using for care. I was using them for distraction from how uncomfortable it was to be on all the time.
Yeah.
So those 3 to 4 hours before I go to sleep at night after he goes down, that's a time for me to practice. The weekends, my husband takes the baby pretty much all weekend so that I can care for myself. And I could binge on TV, which I did quite a bit, and talk on the phone about using narratives and reinforcing narratives that don't serve me. But now I go to church every Sunday. I have not been to church every Sunday since I was like 16 or something, but at some point I was like, I need me some church. And so I've started leaning into, and my women's group, I'm in a business coaching program as well, a mastermind group. So I started actually investing in my own care in a different way, financially, because business mastermind groups are not cheap, but I need a group of women who can hold my professional self that didn't know me as a mother and didn't know me in my past incarnation. And I am willing to pay for that level of holding because that's really important. Church and having musical interludes that reconnect my body to the divine. I'm one of those Black women that's like got her hands up in the air sobbing when the musical interlude starts because song is the way that I connect to the divine. Mm-hmm. Also, I work with nature spirits in my job, and it's not, so the brief story of it is Findhorn is an intentional community in Scotland. Mm-hmm. They started talking to the nature spirits of their vegetables and were able to grow these incredible vegetables in sand, basically. And Paralandra is a community in Virginia, I believe, that has done a lot of sophisticated work for how to connect to nature intelligence for business, for life, for everything. And I am fascinated by the intelligence that lives in nature that's not human intelligence, but it's actually the Gaia web and how to really connect to the Gaia web. So I'll give you the website for that so you can link to the show notes for anyone who's interested as well. But it's really sophisticated. There's a lot of different tinctures and muscle testing and different techniques to use to get very direct, concrete, clear answers for how to work with nature intelligence so that I'm not making decisions from a place of ego or limited information. So I use that a lot. So I've really looked for structures to support the physical and non-physical realms in my life and make sure that I'm surrounding myself with as much infrastructure in that regard as possible so that because I don't get to meditate nearly as much as I used to, and exercise and yoga is hard to come by, there are at least community structures around me that can viscerally support my nervous system with remembering what is beyond me so that I can pull energy from it.
Mm-hmm. Those layers of support are so important, and having different facets and ways that you're supported. So it's not just your husband or even just a coach or a guide, but like so many different ways that you can fall back on if one of those is not available.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I know you're also a public speaker and you give keynote speeches in different places. And I know a lot of women listening are coming more into their voices and their leadership and their businesses and being seen and being heard. And I wonder, one, if it was always easy for you, and two, if you have any tips for women coming into their voices in that way.
I would say that I always had the raw talent and interest for public speaking, but raw talent and interest can go bad real quick. Like the public speakers you see that aren't aware of the audience and kind of run on and on, that are comfortable on stage but are talking at you. That's where raw talent without training can get you. And the best public speaking training that I had, honestly, was improv class. I minored in theater in college, and I took this one improv class multiple times. And it was the kind of improv class where the assignment would be build a friend, bring your friend to school with you all day, and then bring your friend to class and tell us about your friend. So I put 2 sleeping bags on top of each other with a stuffed animal and a poncho and a hat. And I carried my friend around campus all day to my math classes, to everything. And people would just be like, what? WTF? And then had to get up in front of my improv class and tell a really emotionally connected true story about me and my friend. And every assignment was something ridiculous like that. Tell us the story of the roadrunner in a language only known to bees. Like they don't even make logical sense, and you just have to do it in that moment. And I think that it taught me the ability to catch things in real time and not have my body get triggered with anxiety if something doesn't go according to plan in front of a few thousand people. I remember a time when my earring got caught on my scarf at a recorded talk. And I, made a joke about it and fiddled with it, and it still didn't come off. And it was just stuck to my scarf the whole talk. And I ended up reaching up and taking off my other earring so that people weren't distracted by the fact that I only had one earring on. And many people commented afterward that actually allowed them to pay attention to my talk. But I wouldn't have even noticed that my other earring was still on if I was so flummoxed by the fact that my earring got caught on my scarf, So there was that. And then studying under orators that were really brilliant was another way that I got training. I was Van Jones's executive aide for a part of his career, and he is a brilliant orator, and he gave me a lot of pointers. But more than anything, just being able to watch someone who was speaking multiple times a week for like a year straight, what his preparation process was, the way his talks changed over time. It was such an incredible education of what it takes to be a professional public speaker. And so through all of that, that was how I built my public speaking skill set that could match my raw talent at it. And I mean, the last piece is that I'm an entertainer. I'm a performer. I love to sing. The stage is a love of my heart, and that definitely helps.
Yes. It's nice to hear that. I think sometimes people look at these amazing public speakers and are just like, how can they do that? I could never do that. But then to realize that for most people, it took time and training and years of practice. I think that's important to recognize that it's not always just like that.
No, it's really not.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that you, like in terms of fears that you've faced in your career, anything that stands out as like something you feel proud of, or a fear that you faced, something that you really stepped into even though you were afraid?
Honestly, I think continuing to run my business as a mother. My husband and I had a really deep conversation about whether I should go get a job and have a salary and a maternity leave, especially considering the fact that it took me so long to get pregnant and it was difficult. We didn't want my body to be under any undue stress. And I didn't know what it was going to look like to try to work really hard during my pregnancy so that I could have 4 months off, knowing that I have no access to the things that you have access to if you're an employee. And so it was really scary to just kind of walk off the edge and know that if I made the wrong decision, it wasn't like I was going to be able to go get a job during my maternity leave. And I didn't want to walk into a new job with a 3 or 4 month old either and have that newness kind of interrupt the newness of me being a new mom. But those were definitely options on the table. So I think just acknowledging, and then we ended up having to move unexpectedly when my son was 9 months into the Oakland housing market, which is no joke.
Oh, no.
So there were many times when, like, the decision to be an entrepreneur is a repeated decision. And I love my business and I love my clients. And so it was a difficult decision, but I have been able to step into a new understanding of business and leadership, and understand that the calling that I have is one that deserves time and space. So I stepped into it and it's gone well, which has felt like a real blessing.
Yeah. And how do you show up for yourself or create space around the unknown in entrepreneurship? And if fear does come up around, oh, contract is ending, I don't know what's going to happen next, or how do you calm those thoughts or be in the unknown of entrepreneurship?
Well, I mean, a real thing is my business coaching. I part of when I say I joined business masterminds is that there are very concrete ways to not worry about your client pipeline and to build your brand so that people actually know what you do. Because that's a whole thing. Like, building a brand is a lot of it is much less about ego and just a lot more of, if people have a vague sense of what you're about and they like you, it does not give them an idea of what they can work with you to do. And people cannot hold that much information in their heads. So make it real easy for people to know how they can collaborate with you. And I need help with that. And so I hired a business coach to really help me streamline and sophisticate my business. And that has been a real eye-opener for me and has helped me up-level a lot this year. So I just went and got help when there were things I didn't know.
Yeah, it's so key, having support and guides that have walked that path before and can give insight where maybe we can't see because we're so intimate with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there anything coming up in your business now that you're excited about or that you want to share? That how can people connect with you or work with you or what?
Yeah.
All of that?
Yeah, there's actually a new partnership that I'm doing this year that I'm really excited about with Lakita Williams of Co-Create Work. Many of my clients, I was working with them on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within their companies and nonprofits. And I would find that so much of what goes on with diversity and inclusion is just straight up company culture work, systems and policies. And you can't have good diversity and inclusion if you don't have good systems to implement. So that partnership she is an expert on company culture, and I do diversity and inclusion. So we're going to be able to offer some holistic services to really purpose-driven companies. And of course, the love of my heart is triple bottom line businesses. So I have this dream of working with companies that have a green business or environmental focus, who know that diversity and inclusion in that sector can be hard. But that's where I've lived my whole career. And it's something I am deeply passionate about and very skilled at. And so I would love to work with those companies to look at diversity and inclusion, both within their company and with their clients and their work. That's the partnership this year. And that's what I'll be focusing on for the next few months.
Amazing, amazing work. Are there any closing words or anything you'd love to leave our listeners with today before I close this conversation with a short prayer?
Gratitude comes up for me. I feel like this is the most whole I've showed up in a podcast ever. I talked about stuff I really don't normally talk about. So I just really appreciate whoever's listening to this for being able to receive me, and thanking you, Meredith, for your desire to represent the whole of me. And if you are wanting to connect to that infinite source, dig your hands and your toes into some soil.
Yes. So let's just take a moment to soften our eyes closed and just feel back into our bodies. And just recognizing all the parts of ourselves that don't always get to be seen or acknowledged or heard. And feeling into that state of wholeness and how much can be created from this place when we are recognizing all of us and all of the people that we interact with and collaborate with and serve in this life. So I will just bring my hands to my heart and bow with much gratitude for Nikki for sharing your wisdom with us today. So many gems in here. And to everyone listening, just may you be infinitely supported on your path. Namaste. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to our show today. We would love to hear what you think. Take a moment to hop on over to iTunes and leave us a review. We'd be so grateful to receive it. Until next time, namaste.